I did a story once, and I don't even recall what the story was. And a gentleman came up to me afterwards, said he was from the country of Malawi. And he said, my grandmother always said, Chile chonse ungopange ngati, pale be chikondi, pale be wachika. Chile chonse ungopange ngati, pale be chikondi, pale be wachita. Whatever you do, if you have not done it with love, you have done nothing. In 1988, I was invited to apply as a group leader for a special program in Philadelphia, which was at that time about 3 years old. And it was begun after there was some increasing tension, anger, and meanness between the African American and Jewish communities in the United States, and Philadelphia was feeling that as well. And two gentlemen came together, both prominent in our city. One was William Gray, the late William H. Gray, who was majority Democratic whip in Congress at that time, but also was a minister, came from a family of ministers. And George M. Ross, who was chairman of the American Jewish Committee, and the two of them came together and said, what can we do to address this increasing tension in our city? So they came up with an idea for a program they thought they might institute for a couple of years. This year will be year 32. And the idea was to identify students from both communities, African American and Jewish, who had already demonstrated some leadership abilities in their communities, in their schools, in their synagogues, in their churches, in some instances in their mosques. And these, they felt, would be or could be Philadelphia's future leaders. So they wanted to bring them together in a program, and students would apply in their 11th grade year, and after an application and interview process, 6 African American, 6 Jewish students were selected. 3 Jewish boys, 3 Jewish girls, 3 black boys, 3 black girls. And they would embark on a journey that would end up changing really all of our lives in so many ways. It involved a trip to 2 African countries in West Africa, Senegal and Gambia, and an immersion in the culture, engagement with the people. Also a trip to Israel as well. And again, it was an immersion in the culture. And in the evenings, we would have pretty in-depth discussions about what we had experienced, including all the complexities of the issues that existed in Israel, but also for us as Jews and people of African descent in America as well. In Israel, we had an opportunity to go to an Arab village, the village of Dabariya. And we were matched with young people, young Israeli students who were going to accompany our students. And when they found out we were going to an Arab village, they got a little nervous, a little fearful. And one of them said, well, I don't know. I told my mother she is afraid. But the very next morning, she was there at our hotel bright and early and said, if this is something that you're going to do with your students, I want to go too. We had an opportunity to go into the home of an Israeli Arab. We were served tea and sweets. And she connected with a young woman, a teenager who was standing there. And after a few minutes, we heard laughter coming from both of them. It turned out that they went to the same school, had never met each other, had gone to the same summer camp, and had much in common. We did a Hands Across Dabariya and sang the Hands Across America song, but substituted Dabariya. We visited Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, which is evidence of the depths to which human cruelty can go. In Senegal, we stayed in homes of people and ate from the common bowl of food with our hands. We took the chaloupe, the small boat, across the water from Dakar to Grey Island. where the slave castle sits, and walk through the small, spirit-filled, cramped dirt floors where people were placed and stored before walking down the plank into the hulls of ships and embarking off to North America and Europe and the islands. One particular year, there had been some skirmishes between Senegalese farmers and Mauritanian farmers, and there was a system of slavery in place in Mauritania in the 80s. They are Senegal's northern border. And a decision was made to try and abolish this system. It was the Arabs who were oppressing and enslaving the indigenous, darker-skinned people. There was a violent backlash, and many people had fled across the Senegalese border and were in structures that were generally used to house grain. And at the time that we went, they had not even quite been given official refugee status by the Senegalese government. The woman who put together our itinerary had an organization of her own and took some money from her organization to buy bread and other supplies, but she thought it might be a good experience for our students to go into this refugee camp and take some things to the people there. I was thinking it might be a low point on what was otherwise a very rich experience. So we went to a large store and we bought wiffle balls and bats and frisbees and Nerf footballs and soccer balls and air pumps and bags and bags and bags of candy. So we got into a van and we went as far as the van could take us, and then we had to get out and walk. So we're walking on this dusty road. I'm looking down and just really thinking this is going to be such a low point and pretty much a mark on our trip. Just watching the dust billowing up from each place we placed our feet. And after a moment or so, we noticed a large dust cloud moving in our direction. And we stopped for a moment and we could hear singing coming from the dust cloud. And as it got closer, we saw that it was children from the refugee camp who had come out to greet us. They were singing, clapping, came into our midst, took our hands, and led us back to the areas where they were staying, behind one of these grain structures. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children, many of them separated from parents, sitting on the ground. So there were some adults standing opposite the children, and so I motioned for my students to go and stand in that area. In fact, I motioned for them to sit, and some women who were there motioned for us to get up, and some of them left the area, and we weren't quite sure what was going on until our guide came over and said, "Oh, you are their guests. They want to give you a gift. They want to give you a piece of theater." Some of the women who had left came back with cloth and fabric. He said they didn't want you to sit in the dirt. Spread the fabric on the ground for my students from America, from homes of plenty, to sit on. Well, we didn't understand the language, but it was a really funny, inventive skit about a young chief who had gone to the French school to learn how to rule his people. And he came back to the village with piles and piles of books. And he would sit down and someone would come to him with a problem and he'd flip through the pages to find the solution and he'd give it to them, and there would be a series of crazy mishaps until a marabout, a spiritual man, reconnected him with the ancestral ways of doing things. Well, it hit me at that point. And I have to say, some of the greatest lessons I've learned about life, about being a human being, have come from children. I, in our Western way of thinking, believe these children had nothing, less than nothing. We went to bring them something, candy, toys, but without money, without status, they gave us the greatest gift of all. They gave us themselves, and seemingly with a fundamental understanding that underneath it all, underneath all of the man-made barriers, we are all fundamentally human. And they did it with gifts that could never be replaced if not valued and nurtured. Well, we didn't just drop our supplies and leave. We owed them much more than that. I stood in the midst of several hundred children, many of them separated from their parents, and with the help of my translator, taught them a version of an Ella Jenkins call and response song. Did you feed my cow? Yes, ma'am. Can you tell me how? Yes, ma'am. My kids taught them how to run bases, how to hit the ball with the bat, and how to throw the football. And girls, young girls with babies on their backs came up to my students and wanted to learn hand clapping games. We helped them prepare food. We sat and ate the food with them. We listened to the elders with the help of our translator tell their stories of their experiences and having to leave their homes. And all the while, little kids kept coming up to me, tapping me, going, "Yes, ma'am." The song was as treasured a gift as the candy, which was by then all gone. Chilichonse unga pangingati, palibe chikondi, palibe wachita, palibe wachita, palibe wachita. Blake